Welcome to Love X Revenge, where broken hearts, silent strength, and unexpected love collide in stories that prove destiny often waits where the world least looks. The wagon creaked to a slow halt at the edge of Dry Hollow, dust swirling around its wheels like whispers of judgment already waiting to rise. Inside sat Eleanor Hayes, hands folded tightly in her lap, her spine straight despite the long journey and the heavier burden pressing on her chest. At 32, she knew what the town would see first: the faint lines near her eyes, the simple dress, the absence of youthful sparkle that most men paid for when ordering a bride. The driver cleared his throat and pointed ahead. "That's Miller Ranch. You best step down now, ma'am." Eleanor nodded, though her throat felt dry. She stepped off the wagon, her worn boots touching the ground of a place that was supposed to be her new beginning. Or perhaps her last chance. Across the dusty yard stood a group of townsfolk, gathered like crows sensing something unusual. A few women whispered behind gloved hands, while two men leaned on a fence, smirking openly. "That her," one muttered. "The mail-order bride," another scoffed. "She looks older than the ad." The words weren't meant to be kind, and they weren't quiet enough either. Eleanor kept her chin high, even as heat crept up her neck. She had heard worse before. Much worse. Being called too old was almost gentle compared to the labels she had endured back east: unwanted, burdensome, leftover. A tall man stood near the barn, hat low over his eyes. He didn't move immediately. He didn't laugh. He didn't whisper. He just watched. This, she assumed, must be the cowboy who had ordered a bride. Daniel Miller. He walked toward her slowly, boots steady, expression unreadable. His presence silenced the small crowd without him saying a single word. He was broad-shouldered, sun-worn, and carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. Eleanor clasped her hands tighter. "Mr. Miller," she said softly. "I am Eleanor Hayes. I answered your request." One of the women behind her snorted. "Request said bride, not governess." Another man chuckled. "Or widow in training." The laughter spread in low waves. Daniel stopped a few feet from Eleanor. For a moment, he simply studied her face, not critically, not mockingly, but as if searching for something only he could see. The silence stretched. Then he spoke, voice deep and calm. "You came alone." "Yes," she replied. "I always have." More whispers. "She's not even young enough to bear him a big family," someone murmured. "Poor man got cheated." Eleanor lowered her gaze briefly. The humiliation pressed down like the desert heat, but she refused to cry. She had not crossed half the country to fall apart at the first cruel laugh. Daniel turned his head slightly toward the crowd. His eyes hardened. "That's enough," he said. The yard fell quiet. He looked back at Eleanor, then extended his hand. "Welcome to Miller Ranch." She blinked in surprise. "You still accept me?" A faint crease appeared between his brows. "Why wouldn't I?" The question stunned her more than any insult. One of the men stepped forward, unable to resist. "Daniel, you paid good money for a mail-order bride. You could have gotten a younger one. Prettier too." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't order a doll." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Another woman crossed her arms. "But she's older than expected." Daniel finally turned fully toward them, his gaze sharp as a blade. "She's the only one I was waiting for." The words landed heavier than thunder. Eleanor's breath caught. She stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. The whispers stopped completely now. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel tipped his hat slightly toward her. "Come, you must be tired." He took her small trunk without asking and led her toward the house, leaving the stunned townsfolk behind. Inside, the ranch house was simple but warm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating polished wood and carefully maintained furniture. Nothing extravagant, but everything steady. Eleanor stood near the doorway, unsure where she belonged in this space. "You don't have to pretend for my sake," she said quietly. "If you wish to send me back, I will understand." Daniel set her trunk down and faced her. "I don't pretend." She hesitated. "Most men who send for a bride expect youth, beauty, fertility, and obedience," he added calmly. She nodded faintly. He leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I asked the agency for someone resilient. Someone who knew hardship. Someone who would not run at the first storm. Her eyes widened slightly. They sent letters, he continued. Many. Girls barely grown. Fancy words, sweet promises. His gaze softened. Yours was the only one that didn't ask what I could give you. Eleanor swallowed. Because I had nothing left to bargain with. That's exactly why, he replied. Silence settled between them, but it was no longer heavy with judgment. It was thoughtful, careful. Days passed. The town did not stop talking. At the market, Eleanor heard the whispers again. That's her. The old bride. He must be desperate. She'll never make a proper ranch wife. She endured it all quietly, buying supplies and returning home with steady steps. But something unexpected began to happen. Daniel never let a single remark pass if he was present. Once, when a ranch hand laughed and called her, past her prime, Daniel's voice cut through the air like steel. Say that again, he warned. The man didn't. Another time, a shopkeeper joked about refunds on mail-order brides. Daniel placed exact payment on the counter and said calmly, respect her, or you lose my business. Gradually, the laughter grew quieter. But Eleanor remained cautious. She worked tirelessly, cooking, mending, tending the small garden, determined to prove her worth even if she was never loved. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she found Daniel repairing a fence. You watch me like you expect me to disappear, he said without looking up. She froze. I apologize. Why? Because I do not understand you. He straightened slowly. What part? Why you defend me? Why you chose me? Why you said those words? He rested his arms on the fence rail, eyes distant. 5 years ago, I was engaged. Her heart tightened. She died during the winter fever, he continued. Young, gentle, kind. He paused. The town said I should find another girl quickly. Start fresh. Replace grief with youth. Eleanor listened silently. But grief doesn't care about youth, he said. It respects strength. He finally looked directly at her. When I read your letter, you didn't hide your age. You didn't hide your losses. You wrote about survival, about rebuilding, about standing when life knocks you down. Her fingers trembled slightly. You didn't sound young, he said softly. You sounded real. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. I thought, he continued, if anyone could understand a quiet house and a heavy past, it would be you. A tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. I was mocked all my life for being too old, too plain, too serious. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lower now. They mock what they don't understand. She laughed weakly. And what do you understand, Mr. Miller? He studied her for a long moment. That you are the bravest person in this town. The weeks turned into months. Winter approached. One stormy night, a group of travelers sought shelter at the ranch. Among them was a loud man who recognized Eleanor from the town. So this is the famous mail-order bride? He laughed. I expected someone younger.